Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us today, whether you're here with us live via Zoom or you're watching this recording. My name is Nicole Randall, and I am the program manager with the South Carolina Child Care Inclusion Collaborative. And I'm so excited to be here today with one of our close partners, Mary Reeves, who's the Director of Community Access with Able SC. And today, Mary is going to be sharing with you about a great opportunity, a great resource that's available to you all as child administrators and owners and directors of childcare programs.
Good morning,
So,
everybody. Thank you, Nicole.
no worries. So before I transition it over to Mary, I just want to share with you all a little bit about the initiative that we're talking about today, the Early Transitions Initiative. So the Early Transition Initiative is funded by DSS through the Department in the Division of Early Care and Education. And the goal of this initiative is to expand placement opportunities for three-year-old children with disabilities so they have an opportunity to be in inclusive settings. And so just a brief overview of the Early Transitions Initiative. It consists of many partners consisting of ABLE, who you'll hear Mary share and describe a little bit more about the supports that ABLE provides the community throughout the states, and the South Carolina Child Care Inclusion Collaborative, and several other partners. And so throughout this initiative, we're working very closely with identified school districts to support them with partnering with child care programs around providing inclusive environments for children that the school districts identify that are three-year-old who have documented disabilities. And so as a part of this initiative, we're helping to ensure children have access to inclusive general education settings with their peers within their community, ideally within community childcare settings. And we're also offering childcare programs, resources, and professional development opportunities that will enhance their inclusive practices. And so we specifically invited you all here today because your location are within those school district attendance zones that we're currently partnering with around promoting this initiative. And so without further ado, I'm going to transition this over to Mary so she can share more with you all about what Able SC and her team does within communities.
Thanks, Nicole. Well, that was a great introduction, and I will just say, super excited for us to be a partner with the Inclusion Collaborative and DSS and get to continue to work with childcare programs on accessibility. So before I jump into that, let me just tell you a little bit about who we Forgive me, my allergies are a hot mess. Saved y'all a cough there. We are a disability-led organization. We're statewide in South Carolina, and we really work towards transformational change in systems, communities, and with individuals. The biggest thing that sets us apart from other organizations is 85% of our staff are people with disabilities, including myself. We are the state's oldest and largest federally recognized disability-led organization. Not on the slide, but I think super impressive. We also are the largest youth provider, the largest Center for Independent Living providing youth services in the entire country. We have youth independent living specialists that go into schools all across the state, and we're just really proud of that. And the biggest thing about us is we didn't just learn this, we do this every day. As I mentioned, 85% of our staff are people with disabilities. And so while the project that I'm going to be telling you a little bit about is based on the Americans with Disabilities Act building standards and what physically makes a space accessible, so much of what we talk with agencies, organizations, childcare programs, individuals, you name it, anyone, about is the experiences of the disability community. So a lot of times we will work with programs not necessarily about what is finger quotes compliance, what does the law say you have to do, but what can you do to make things more accessible? So that's a little bit of what we'll talk about. So you can move us ahead, Nicole. Thank you. Just very quickly, our mission, we're an organization of people with disabilities, as I mentioned. Our goal is to equip people with disabilities with the tools to foster pride and direct their own lives. That's a big part of what we do. Self-advocacy, voice, educating the community to challenge stereotypes and eliminate barriers. And that's what I'm going to talk with you all about is the barrier elimination. And we advocate for access, equity, and inclusion at the individual, local, state, and national level. Our CEO has actually been involved in working with the country of Georgia to help establish their own Americans with Disabilities Act, or the, I guess, Georgia Disabilities Act. I'm not sure what it'll be called, and really working to protect folks with disabilities. And our vision is that South Carolina is a national model of equity and inclusion for people with disabilities. So that's just a little bit about who we are. That's a picture there of us from our, we do an annual event at the State House. It's actually coming up on April 8th. It's our Advocacy Day for Access and Independence. It's a huge event. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of people that come out, and this is our staff. And so you can see, and that's actually not everybody, but it's a pretty good chunk. So super fun day. All right, Nicole, let's get into it. Some of the other things that we can do, my program, Able Access, the architectural assessments that we'll talk about, digital accessibility testing and training. That's something that we do for a lot of organizations with major websites to make sure that their websites are compliant. We also do policy and procedure review, looking at your policies, specifically, for you all, not necessarily related to children that might come into the program, but staff or parents. What are some reasonable accommodations that you can put into place to support staff with disabilities and making processes simpler and more inclusive? Also, job site assessments and recommendations. So if you start thinking about things at the end of today outside of really this project and transitions and providing spaces for kids with disabilities, but you have thoughts about maybe staff, happy to be a resource to you for that. So the focus, and I think Nicole covered this pretty well, but those identified childcare programs, really looking at your buildings, your physical spaces, and maybe some of your programming to figure out how to make it as easy as possible to include kids with disabilities into your buildings and your programs. We do have some Endeavors approved training on disability culture. The social media communications is coming. But disability culture has been approved for 2 hours of special needs credit. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. So before we get into the facility, I'm going to show lots of pictures. All of these are from childcare programs, but I want to caveat things by saying our goal with coming into any organization to do an ADA site assessment is what I formally call it. But is really, we want to take a tour of your facility. I try to make sure folks understand we are not the compliance police. I don't have any badges. I don't do any reporting. I don't do anything like that. My whole goal in any place that I go, whether it's a childcare program, a state agency, a bank, a museum, is to help you identify things that are making it more difficult for your staff, patrons, visitors, families, in this instance, kids. But I really want to be in partnership with you in identifying ways to make your spaces more inviting, because one thing that we know to be certain is that when we make spaces accessible for people with disabilities, it benefits everybody. You might have seen, it's a cartoon graphic, and it's some kids at the front of a school, and there's snow covering the steps. And there's a ramp off to the left side. I saw it again recently, and it reminded me of just how true this is. But an adult is scraping the snow from the steps, and all the kids are waiting at the bottom, and there's a student in a wheelchair And he says, could you do the ramp also? And the adult says, yes, yes, but let me do the steps first. And the child in the wheelchair says, but if you do the ramp, we can all get in. And I think that's really what we try to do is how can we be as inclusive as possible? So that said, what do we do when we come out to an event, come out to a space to really assess? What will we be looking for? We base things on the priorities that are determined through the Department of Justice, which really starts with, can we even get into the place? Can we access the building? It's all about accessibility. So one of the things that we will look at is parking. Are there designated, identified parking spaces? Is the ground, and this is the verbiage from the standards, stable, firm, and slip resistant? Are the parking spaces wide enough? Is there an access aisle? Is there a ramp, as you can see in this image on the right? And so one of the things, again, we'll come in and we'll just look at how easy is it for us to get into the building, for a person with a disability to get into the building? Because what, again, we know to be true is if you have a perfectly accessible, wide open, um, beautifully designed programming inside your building, if we can't get in, doesn't really matter what you have inside, right? So we really want to focus on, can we get in? This is a couple images here. The one on the left shows there's a curb cut next to a parking space, but there's no ramp. So someone using a mobility device is still going to have to step up onto the curb. So while we have a sidewalk that comes all the way out, that might be a barrier. This was staff parking actually. So um, let's say someone is temporarily disabled, broke their ankle and needs to use a rollator or a scooter. This is going to be a barrier, right? So we have a way that even a staff member temporarily disabled can't get into the building. How does that impact programming and services? Um, Again, our focus here is how can we make spaces more accessible for kids, but oftentimes we're going to have an adult who needs to get in before we're going to have a kid. In many cases, the image on the right shows a little curb cut there going up to a front door. And this is one of those great examples where we might look at something and go, "Oh yeah, this is great. Somebody can get up there." Well, when we went and measured, you actually couldn't. If you used a wheelchair and had to turn and cut it, you couldn't get through. And then the doorway opened in a way that you might actually fall off the little step there in the curb to get around the door to get in it if you're using a mobility device. So, um, a small little example of some things that we might find that could be barriers to even getting into a building. All right, look, Nicole, let's move on inside. Hallways and doorways, other things that we're going to look at is you can see on the left all kinds of wonderful things hanging. We've got foot covers, we've got beautiful art. One of the things that we recognize, and a lot of times folks don't think about this, is things sticking off of the wall. So the standards will say that nothing needs to be protruding off the wall more than 4 inches unless it's really tall, 80 inches high, or is attached to the ground, so like on a stand. And the reason for that is if someone is blind or low vision and is maybe using a white cane or has a dog guide, they might walk closer to the wall just to stay, kind of on track, orienting themselves to location. And things like this can be problematic if you bump into that, right? So if you maybe have a child who's blind or low vision and he's just getting into that orientation and mobility training, which is learning how to navigate spaces. This might be a spot where a little person, could run headfirst right into that foot cover. So these are some of the things that we, again, will help identify. There's something else, you maybe can't quite see it in that picture, but the doorknobs, twisting doorknobs, we look at things that are going to be easier for folks to navigate. So the pull handles. And so really helping identify barriers. The one on the right, the doorway, has a big step. So again, if we have a student who uses a wheelchair, a staff member still on that rollator after that broken ankle trying to get into the door. Maybe a student with let's say some limited mobility, cerebral palsy, just to kind of give you some more concrete examples, where mobility is a little bit more um, limited. This is a trip and fall hazard, right? So these are the kinds of things that we look at and help you identify. Go ahead, Nicole. Classrooms. I have had the privilege of working with childcare providers really for about the last 7 or 8 years. Before I came to ABLE, I was with another organization, and which is where I've met some of you on the call. We were able to come in and provide hearing screenings, and I also spent a significant portion of my 20s working in childcare. Um, and I know that I'll call the royal we do a whole lot with a little bit. And a lot of times we're working in very tight spaces. We have very limited room. Um, the picture on the left, I have 3 kiddos. My now 10-year-old, but she's been this way since she was little. She refused to go to school without every possible thing she could think of. All the backpacks, all the lunch boxes, a sweater for this day. Um, Kids show up, they bring things, water bottles, all that stuff. We've got limited space. So I want to caveat this picture with saying I recognize and appreciate how much limited space there is. And so when we come into a center, it is never in a place of criticism. It is recognizing you have limited room. How can I help you take that limited room and recognize what things might be barriers? So this is just an example of a hook that wouldn't be accessible for maybe a child who's of short stature or limited mobility using a mobility device. And so we can come in and go, okay, so what could we do? How could we orient the space? Could we put a hook on the other side of the wall? One hook that is accessible. We have cubbies up high. Could we place a cubby in another place? So how can we rethink our spaces? Again, recognizing limited opportunity, limited space, limited fun. So my goal is always to help you figure out how can I do this very inexpensively, even better, free. And a lot of times we really can. The image on the right, I wanted to make sure we showed an example of a well laid out oriented space with lots of accessibility considerations. So these desks are mounted to the wall, and we have the little stools that you can pull out, which is super easy. Let's say we have a child using a wheelchair. That little green stool at that first desk on the left just gets slid out of the way, and that wheelchair rolls right up underneath there, and no one is the wiser. One of the other things that we hear often in our office, excuse me, is when spaces aren't readily accessible, when we haven't considered what a person using a mobility device, for example, might need, having to say, "Can you help me move this chair? I can't get under the desk." It's not that big of an ask, right? But when you do that over and over again, and let's say you ask a person, I was presenting yesterday and I was talking about how often a young person or even an adult might say, "Can you help me?" And you just get a quick a sigh, and unintentional, but it's, oh my gosh, I have, yes, 15 things I have to do. Yes, just 1 second, I'll get there. So it begins to feel a little bit like a burden. So when we have places that are readily accessible, and a child, a student, a staff member doesn't have to ask. They can just go navigate those spaces. And part of what we're trying to teach, especially these young kiddos, is independence, right? When spaces are readily accessible, it creates so many wonderful ways for autonomy, not having to ask for help, um, reducing opportunities to feel like a burden, which is such a common um, instance. So, a couple examples of classrooms. Bathrooms. I know bathrooms are tough for everybody. Um, Disability community at large, the biggest barrier to going places and doing things is a bathroom. Bathrooms are notoriously inaccessible. I'm sure you've all been in one. Um, and I will say very often I will go see the blue sign. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. It's the international symbol of accessibility. It's blue. There's a little wheelchair guy. Um, and that is usually our cue that something is accessible, right? Or it's supposed to be accessible. I can't tell you how often that when I'm doing these assessments, I'll see a sign and it will turn out that it's not accessible at all. So do kind of have that in the back of your head that if you see that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is. Um, this bathroom, this is the picture on the right, the larger bathroom of the full space. It actually is accessible. It's plenty wide enough. It's got a couple issues of things that I'll point out. It's got excuse me, grab bars on the wall. The toilet paper is placed in the right place. The toilet is the right height. The sink is the right height. The pipes aren't covered, which is problematic. Um, but generally speaking, this is an accessible bathroom. So you might say, okay, Mary, well, then what's the issue? Well, it's an accessible bathroom for adults. And so, if we have a childcare program and we are hoping to ensure that we have an opportunity for a child with a disability, there are very specific standards for bathrooms, for sinks, for workstations, for kids. And this one doesn't comply. And that's something that we find often. And I think, I've had discussions again, having had the privilege to work with childcare programs and talk with directors and providers. Kids are going to go into adult spaces, right? And so we're learning, teaching them how to navigate spaces. But this can be a barrier to the independence that we're hoping to instill in some of our kids, specifically those kids with disabilities. It's hard enough to learn how to transfer independently, maybe from a wheelchair to a toilet. It's 3 times as hard if the toilet is 6 inches higher than the standards that call for it to be. So, in a program like this, for example, this is not one of those inexpensive or free fixes. But what we recommend in a situation like this, what we would come in and talk with you about is how can we make one restroom accessible? At least one in the building. And that's really what the ADA says based on the number that you have. It's roughly 5% or at least one is accessible. The sink on the left is one that was in a kitchen area or like the cafeteria, and it was a little too tall as well. So, and that's oftentimes a quick fix. Maybe we add an additional hand washing station, or we have one in the hallway, or we know of one that's shorter, and that's where this classroom that has a child with a disability stops to wash their hands. Excuse me. Goodness, excuse me. I love this beautiful weather we're having, but it is a mess. Okay, Nicole, let's keep going. Playgrounds. Play is my favorite thing. I think as adults, we often forget how much we need to play, right? Play is also, and playgrounds also prove to be one of the areas that are significant barriers to kids with disabilities. And some of the discussions that we've had lately are with regard to the ground covering. And I think that is one of those spaces where as we work with more childcare programs, trying to figure out what are the ground coverings that you can use that are allowed with regard to DSS regulations and playground regulations, and then what are those that are, forgive me, my computer just said, you need to reboot. No, thank you, not right now. And what are those that will be stable, firm, slip resistant ground so that a person with a disability can navigate those. And so the one on the left shows a ground covering that is fine. There were some areas where there were dips and divots, and that can make it really hard. This was a great example of a play structure that had some elements on the ground. It's not a really good picture of it, but DSS does call for elements that you don't have to climb onto. I'm sorry, the ADA does require elements that you don't have to climb onto, so that if a student can't do that, a child can't do that, there are still things on the ground that they can engage with their peers who are playing on this structure. The image on the right is a picnic table, and that is fantastic. We love having those areas out and about where folks can gather. This can be an area of a barrier for students because there's not a place where you could pull up a wheelchair or a mobility device, right? So let's say we're doing an outside activity here. This one I think happened to be next to a garden. And when they were doing gardening activities, they would spin that um, picnic table out sideways, and students would sit on both sides. The children would sit on both sides. So in this example, you have a child who is using a wheelchair, and they're not able to pull up to the table, right? So what does that they kind of sit off to the side. They're not engaged in that discussion, and maybe we're tasting strawberries that we grew that day. So having spaces again that are readily accessible makes such a big difference in the inclusion and the opportunity for students with disabilities to just come right on in and join every activity that that the other children are engaging in. All right, Nicole, is that our last one?
It is now, that was the last photo. And so I think the next
Yeah.
topic is training.
Yes, yes. Well, I think if it's okay, I know we haven't this in webinar format, but I rolled through a whole bunch of things. I'm wondering, folks on the call, do y'all have any questions? Before I get into the training element, I'd love to just take a minute to, answer anything that you have. If was that like, whoa, you know, this is your opportunity to ask me anything. Perfect. Yes, Suzanne said, type that, ask to unmute if you'd like to do so. And ask anything. Again, I want to highlight that unless your building was built, well, I was going to say, unless your building was built in the last 5 years, the likelihood that everything is accessible is probably not. But I just did a site assessment for a location affiliated with USC, and it was they just got their certificate of occupancy 3 weeks ago, and we found multiple elements that were not accessible. And it really is, there are a lot of things that even the folks doing the inspections, the builders, there are little things that are getting missed. So there are almost always going to be elements that are inaccessible. But again, our goal is to help you come in and figure out how to remove those barriers as easily as possible. We do have some ideas and possibilities to help with funding because I know that's a big, big thing. Oh, before we get to the training, and I don't see any questions, so I'm just going to keep talking. But y'all feel free to interrupt me. Sorry, I forgot where I was going. So when we come in and do the assessment, we put together a report for you. And it has lots of photos, it has the codes and the citations and what those elements are, but we really go item by item and highlight what you can do. What's the issue? And then what can you do to fix it? And we provide lots of links, we provide lots of resources. Again, our goal is to really be in partnership with you to figure out how to eliminate those barriers. We help you prioritize which ones you really need to start here. You know, do this one first and this one later. And we're an ongoing resource for you. I have a lot of folks who will call and say, okay, Mary, we think we figured out how to do this one. We got the $15,000 to do a parking lot, for example. And can you come and make sure they do it right? Absolutely. We're here to help. That is our goal, is to, again, eliminate the barriers, and be your partner while we do so. So, okay, well, I don't see any questions. Nicole, let's go ahead and go to training. I mentioned that we have two, disability culture through the eyes of a child with a disability. This one was just Endeavors approved. This is an image of Dory Tempio, our Senior Director of Community Education, who it would be Dory and I doing those trainings. And Dory is a person with a disability. You can see there she's in her power wheelchair and has her service dog Hera at her side. Dory also lived in an institution until she was 7 or 8 and was adopted, and then went on to teach in an elementary school for 12 years. So she brings such a wealth of information, not only as a person with a disability, that lived experience, but also having been in a classroom and educating. And so that's a great training. If I do say so myself. Again, 2 hours of special needs hours, and Endeavors approved. I have not set up a training event. I was kind of waiting to see how we used to do that at my other organization, was really organization by or program by program. Could give us a call and we can come out and do the training, as opposed to setting up an event. So that's certainly an option. If you're like, okay, we want this training, you can reach out to us and we can come to you in person, virtually, whatever. The accessible communications, that one is coming. That's really going to help you figure out, if you're doing flyers, if you're doing email blasts, if you have a website, how are you making sure that you are legally compliant? Because there are some laws that say what your website, what your digital communication has to look like to be accessible to people who are blind or low vision, or have maybe intellectual developmental disabilities. So we can walk you through that, but that one's coming. The disability culture is approved and ready to go. And this is how you find us. You can go to the website, the email, and actually I'm going to put my email in here. No, I'm not, because I can only do it to hosts and panelists. But my email is mreeves@advocacy- able-sc.org. But if you email that advocacy, actually it comes to my inbox and a few others. So that's probably just the simplest way to do that. All right, I'm gonna type it out here and Suzanne is gonna get it for us. Thank you, ma'am. There we go. So, if you are thinking, okay, I really want to know a little bit more about this site assessment, or you want to get going on the training, just reach out to me, send me an email, give me a call, and we will make it happen. I'm going to say it again, because, adult learners, we need to hear a bunch of things a bunch of times. Our goal is to be in partnership with you, and to really help you figure out how to easily remove those barriers. So I have the privilege of having a really wonderful team that wants to partner with as many folks as we can. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Mary. And so we are going to provide space for you all to another opportunity to ask questions. If you have any, please do, as Suzanne shared in the chat box. You can raise your hand. You can to be provided permission to unmute. You can type your question into the chat box. We also want to highlight that if your team, some of you may have worked with our program in the past, is in need of any on-site or virtual support as far as in the classroom with things, if your teachers are experiencing children exhibiting challenging behavior, if your teacher are in need of additional support around implementing inclusive teaching practices, please also don't hesitate to reach out to the South Carolina Child Care Inclusion Collaborative. We have coaching, consultation, and training opportunities available to you and your team through our inclusion specialists. We also have some online modules available, all approved through SC Endeavors as well. But again, I really want to thank Mary from taking the time out to share about what their wonderful organization with ABLE is doing and how they're being a great partner with us to help promote inclusive practices, inclusive programming within the community. So I'll pause for a second. Thank you, Suzanne. She also shared that she will email everyone a link to this recorded webinar. So if you want to share it with your team members and others within your program, please feel free to do that. And then at any time, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Mary or myself.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicole. I really appreciate this. And folks, it was an honor to get to talk to you again. And I really do hope I get to meet some of you soon, or in some cases, see some of you again.
Right. Well, you all, if there aren't any questions, thank you again. We want to be mindful of your time. If you do have any questions, but prefer not to ask them on the group, we can hang back for a couple of minutes as well. But thank you all again for taking time out of your day to learn more about the Early Transitions Initiative, ABLE SC, and the South Carolina Child Care Inclusion Collaborative. We hope you have a good day.